Hi, I'm Andre Koen, and we're really going to spend just a little bit of time going through this slide deck and encourage you to go through the whole presentation yourself. Just want to touch on some high points. Don't want to read to you or take too much of your time going through this. But we really want to talk about this idea that diversity is a statement of our values, that our values and that diversity are not additional things that we have to do or that we're mandated to do, but they're simply a statement of our values, right? And so some of the objectives are very clearly that we have to recognize that we want to discuss personal commitment to values when interacting in a diverse world. We also want to recognize the similarities of values across diverse patient and employee populations, right? So those two objectives are at the key of what we want to look at. We also recognize that this particular presentation is a part of a larger program conducted by professionalism and values, right? So please take some time and read kind of this disclaimer in these sets of goals. When we talk about diversity and inclusion, there are particular ways in which we define that in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And so it is really about, diversity is about this recognition of our commonalities and our differences, and that both of these are important to recognize, right? So in lots of ways, we are very much alike, but there are also ways that we're different that also are important to recognize. So the honoring and the accounting for our commonalities and differences. And inclusion is creating this environment where individuals can give their collective best and reach their full potential, right? And reach their potential as individuals, but together we give our collective best. And so diversity is this honoring of commonalities and differences, and inclusion is how we use those commonalities and differences to help reach our collective best and to help individuals reach their full potential. So values give us direction, right? So if a patient said, I don't want that black blood, there are lots of ways that we could address that, but I'd like for us to think about how would we address that with our organizational values, right? So if a coworker said to another one, and joking or serious, however they wanted to, those don't look like scrubs on her, right? So that could have a number of different meanings, but the real question is, how do you get guidance from our values to address that particular kind of statement, right? So I also want you to recognize that our values give us courage. Even in the face of not having enough resources or skills or ability, we still can act courageously based on our values. And so this is a picture of the 35W bridge collapse back in 2007. And for those of you who are not from this area, this collapse happened over the Mississippi River. And there were a number of people who, so there's lots of chaos and, and the feeling of danger going around. But there are individuals who ran towards the school bus that was full of children to help. I'm not sure if those individuals had, the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they've practiced this, they knew what to do, but they knew enough based on their values that they were going to go and help these children, even if they didn't have those things. So values give us courage, right? In the face of not having enough resources or whatever the excuses are that we typically use not to move. And so one of the things that's important to recognize is that our values, we operate out of our values. So this is an activity that I typically do in class, where I have people on the outside boxes place 4 things that they value. And I encourage them to go around the room and find people who also value very similar things and put check marks next to those things, and then we tally up those numbers within the room. If you're by yourself or you're looking at this online, you may want to do it as an activity and think about those people who in your life value many of the same things that you wrote down, right? So you might want to write their name down or whatnot around those things. What we find when we do this in a classroom setting or on an instructor-led training is that there are lots of things that we value that are similar. And so people from different backgrounds value many of the same things. What we also find is that people value different things, right? And so people write down different things as they go about doing this work. So again, diversity is about our commonalities and our differences. However, there are some things that hold true in both those cases, and that is that we're often after the same or similar things, right? So we're looking for significance, belonging, and safety. Significance says that I'm a person with purpose and power, that I can do something. And either this is something that the universe shows me, or something that I decide to work towards, right? So this significance, this power, this ability to do things. And we're all looking for that. We're also looking for belonging. We want to be in relationships with people and groups that recognize our significance, that recognize our power, right? And lastly, we're looking to be safe. We want to be physically, mentally, psychologically, spiritually safe to be in relationships with people who understand our significance, right? And in doing that, we are honoring humanity. So why do kids join gangs? Because they're looking for safety, significance, and belonging. Why do kids join 4-H or the Boys and Girls Club? Because they're looking for safety, significance, and belonging. What's the difference between the kid who joins a gang and a kid who joins the Boys and Girls Club? Typically, often, it is about the direction in which those things are directed. And so if we understand what people want, then their methods become negotiable, right? And so I would submit that if kids in gangs could find other ways to get what they needed or wanted, they might actually not join a gang. And so sometimes I joke about, 4-H adopting gangs. That would be an interesting kind of conversation, but a discussion for another time. So when we think about these concepts of diversity and inclusion, I wonder, with this activity, I wonder which of these rich ties values are congruent with how we've defined diversity and how we've defined inclusion. And so in the classroom setting, what I would do is have people put a check mark or circle, either a thumbs up, that this value is coherent with diversity and inclusion as we've defined it, or a thumbs down that it is not congruent. And so I'll give you just a couple of minutes to do this exercise. It should be pretty obvious, right? Yes, it is. It should be obvious that all of these values are congruent with how we define diversity and inclusion. Something to note, a little information, a little data to kind of support what we've been talking about, is that there are within our organization, according to the climate assessment, 77% of employees who did the climate assessment felt like they had to cover or augment something about themselves to be in this space, right? 77% of employees, and that cuts across racial and socioeconomic lines of the folks who are employed with us, feel that they have to change something to fit into this organization. We know nationally that so-called minority groups feel that way, right? So they use the term gays in this particular assessment. So 83% of people who identified as being gay felt like they had to cover. And you can see the numbers for what they call Blacks and women and Hispanics and Asians. But the one I thought was very interesting was straight white men. So uncovering with values. So I find it interesting that the group that I thought was the most interesting was straight white men, and they felt 45% of them felt like they had to change something about themselves to be in the workplace, and that's a national average. What I want to come back to with this slide is that if I'm spending 77% of my time doing X, Y, and Z, thinking about, practicing, performing to fit into this environment, what opportunity costs have I given up? Right. So what else could I be spending my time doing, or what am I not spending my time doing that I could? Right. So if 77% of my energy and my efforts is going into trying to manipulate, act in a particular kind of way, are there lost opportunities that my organization could be capitalizing on? And so when we think about our values give us perspective. So are we about inclusion, or are we about tolerance? And so tolerance is that concept that I'm going to put up with something until I no longer have to, right? Like that family member that has stayed too long. You put up with that because you know at some point they're going to leave, right? So that's this idea of tolerance. We've defined inclusion. So I want you to think about these rich ties values, and in terms of what we're trying to foster in our organization, are we fostering inclusion or tolerance? So go ahead at this point and just check one of those two based on our rich ties values. More than likely, you probably checked inclusion, right? Because that is congruent with our rich ties values. So this diversity statement is a statement of our values. Also, equal opportunity versus reverse discrimination. Equal opportunity is making sure that we haven't set artificial barriers that keep people out, that we have open and transparent processes by which people can not only get into the organization, but advance in the organization and reach their fullest potential. Reverse discrimination is this concept that we've created artificial barriers that diminish one group and raises another group, that folks feel like they're a new minority, and that things have changed against them. And so when we think about what we're after in this organization, is it equal opportunity or reverse discrimination? And so when you look at those rich ties values, it should become very clear that we're looking for, you got it, equal opportunity, right? And not reverse discrimination. And so even in the world, as people talk about these things, you have to address those concerns of reverse discrimination with actual values, right? So what do organizations and companies value? Do they want to do discrimination in any of its forms to their working population or to the public? And I would say it's not to their advantage to engage in reverse discrimination, but really to create this equal opportunity for people to join the organization. In terms of our values, they give us clarity. So is it, in terms of how we expect people to communicate with one another, is it about political correctness or mutual respect, right? So political correctness is kind of like when your parents used to make you give someone a hug, right? Or you had wronged your brother and sister in some kind of way, or your sibling or cousin, and the adults in your family said, well, shake hands, give them a hug, say you're sorry, right? You do those things because the adult told you to, but you really didn't necessarily feel that, right? Mutual respect is when you've given that kind of apology because you actually felt that you harmed that person, you want to have a better relationship with them, right? And so mutual respect was, I would submit to you, is really about, calling people what they want to be called, using whatever gender pronouns they want used for them, meeting them in ways that are helpful to them, simultaneously expecting the same in return, right? So call me what I want to be called, and treat me how I want to be treated, based on our mutual respect. And so when we think about political correctness and we think about mutual respect, which of those is congruent with our values? And I would submit to you that it is, drum roll please, mutual respect, right? So there is that. Lastly is this, our values give us direction. And so is it equality of service or equity of service? So equality is this, if I can just boil it down to a very simple concept, is that everyone gets shoes, right? So equality, everybody gets shoes. Equity is making sure that people get shoes that fit them, right? So when we say equality of service, and we say equity of service, and we look at our rich ties values, what are we after? And you may have gotten the point on this, right? We're looking for both equality of service as well as equity of service. So we want to make sure that everyone gets the same great level of service, and as needs arise for people to get unique and particular services, that we're able to administer those, right? So when we have folks who say, well, I don't want that type of nurse, and there is something around their health concerns or their psychological safety, that having a different kind of nurse could help them advance their healing process, we certainly can look at accommodating those things. However, when those things, those requests aren't related to or actually hinder the healing process, then we're much less inclined to accommodate those types of things. So our values should drive everything we do: how we create community, how we invite others in, how we navigate conflict, how we cross-culturally communicate, how we share knowledge, how we treat people should always be based on our values. And those rich ties values drive how we interact with patients and the world. And we know that people can't necessarily see your values unless they're lived, right? And so here are a couple of key questions that I want you to kind of keep in mind. Using your values, how do you engage in diversity and inclusion conversations using the values, right? So how do you address pitfalls? How do you address advances using the values as the primer for that? And then how do the rich ties values inform your D&I interactions, right? So how do you even learn more about D&I from interactions with other people using the values to do that? And lastly, we know that lived values is the platform for joy, right? So the opportunity to live our values, to engage with our values, to understand other people, how other people manifest those values in their daily lives, in their work, really leads to these opportunities of joy. So my name is Andre Koen. Feel free to reach out to the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. I look forward to interacting with you in some exciting new ways. So we look forward to helping you to move bold and forward. This is Andre Koen, and I look forward to interacting with you. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you for joining us for this values presentation. Bye.